see companies and they reach a certain size and then they don't have that same exponential growth. And technology is the same way, by the way. So all you AI truthers, we don't know where the sky is for AI.
How businesses are set up and the organisms that businesses evolve from is very similar to how our body is, like our biology and how our body is set up.
And the way I applied that in my personal life was, even though I was doing my thing in my 9 to 5, the first hour of every morning, which is when I'm most productive personally, that first hour is my hour.
All right, folks, welcome to Investing for Beginners podcast. Today, we're going to do something fun. Today, we're going to do a profile of a famous investor. And our first choice, Johnny, what do you win? We're going to talk about Charlie Munger today. So Charlie recently passed and is no longer with us and with Warren, but we thought it would be kind of fun to break down a little bit of his life, talk about some of the things that were important to him and the impact he had on Berkshire Hathaway, Buffett, and us. And so I guess with that, maybe let's just start and talk a little bit about maybe a bit of his early career and kind of his time with Warren, if you will.
Sure. You're the history nut, so I'll let you do that one.
All right. Charlie actually has an interesting backstory, if you will. So he started as a lawyer. And interesting tidbit, he and Warren actually worked at Warren's grandfather's grocery store in Omaha at different times. So they didn't know each other, even though they lived in the same area and they worked at the same place, but not at the same time. So Charlie he spent a lot of his time in Los Angeles, and Warren was obviously in Omaha. Charlie was a lawyer by training, as he went to school and got a degree as a lawyer and worked as a lawyer for a while. And he had kind of a rough life early on. He lost a son to leukemia. He also got divorced around the same time, lost everything, including his home. And then when he got a little older, he actually developed cataracts in one of his eyes and had a botched surgery and lost one of his eyes. And he never quit going. He never quit doing his thing. He never gave up, but he didn't have an easy life early on. So he was a good testament to perseverance and just keeping going. But he and Warren developed a friendship early on. And when Charlie decided he wanted to quit to being a lawyer, he started working with Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway. So Buffett started off his investing career without Charlie, and Charlie was a little bit later addition to the Berkshire Hathaway, I guess, pass. So that's like a 30-second overview of his early life. And maybe we could talk a little bit about his influence on Buffett and his investment strategies and maybe how that's shaped Berkshire today and Buffett today.
Yeah, definitely. Munger had a huge impact on Buffett. And you could argue the big turning point was their purchase of See's Candies. So to understand the dynamics between Charlie and Warren Buffett was very much a deep, deep value investor for many years. And he picked a great time to do that, by the way. I can't remember, sometime in like the mid 50s, he started his partnership and he was buying really beaten up stocks that weren't loved, didn't need to be the greatest business in the world. And he would, when he had conviction on an idea, he would load up. I think he put 40% of his portfolio in the American Express one time during the scandal, and that ended up being a great investment for him. So Buffett did very, very well. I think one of the issues, and this is just my thoughts, so take it for what it is, but I think one of the issues is Buffett's obviously a very long-term thinker. So he probably saw the path he was going on and realized, okay, if I continue being successful at this, there is a scale size limit to how much I can make investments like this over and over again. There's only going to be so many opportunities where you can really get a beaten up stock. And if you have too much money, like your fund has too much money, you won't be able to participate in a lot of those. One of the things that Charlie Munger showed him was that just buying good businesses and holding them can help you mitigate some of that issue, because what you're doing when you're buying a good business, and Nick Sleep and Nick and Zach really talked about this too in Richer, Wiser, Happier, the book by William Green. this concept that if you buy a good business and you're holding it for a long term, you're basically delegating the decisions of what to do with that capital to the CEOs of the companies that are run. You're leveraging their ability to reinvest and grow, and you don't have to necessarily do that for yourself. So there were a lot of things that Charlie taught Warren. I like to think that the idea of delegating to a good management and letting management allocate capital, the idea of when you're invested in great businesses, you don't necessarily need to be finding home run stocks every month. You can just sit and hold. That's also very appealing. So those are some of the things I think that helped. Not to say that that was everything, but some of those things helped Buffett to transform, and he moved away from the deep value into more of the buy a great business and hold for the long term.
Mhm. Yeah, he had a tremendous impact on Warren's investment philosophy because, as you said, he was. I like to think of it as a dumpster diving. He bought junk, and maybe not junk, but he bought some unloved businesses, shall we say, and he was killing it early on. I recently read through his early shareholder letters when he was running the partnership, and he was beating the Dow at the time was what he was comparing himself to. He was beating the Dow by 15-20% a year annually. It was crazy. Big numbers. And it was kind of a shock that he wrapped up his partnership and started moving towards the Berkshire Hathaway model. Another funny tidbit. Asked at an annual meeting what his worst investment mistake was, he always says it was Berkshire Hathaway because it was a terrible business, as he put it, when he bought it. But obviously, it's turned out very well for him and his shareholders. But he feels like it was a bad investment. But Charlie came along at the right time for Warren because, as you said, he really helped him see that there was another way to invest, and there was a better way to invest that would fit not only what Warren wanted from his investments, i.e., the returns, but I think also to help him have a little bit better, I guess, I don't want to say work-life balance because I don't think that was really a thing back then, but just to have a better mindset and framework of how you think about stocks and how much you think about stocks, because the kinds of companies that Charlie was encouraging him to buy were less of the ones you got to go home and stress about at night, like what's going to happen with this, and these were more of a sleep well at night kinds of investments. So I think he had a tremendous impact on Charlie. And you could see it if you go back and listen to the early recordings of the annual meetings from 94, 95 to current. You can hear the changes that were happening even back then to comparing to what he says now. And they aren't drastic, but you can definitely hear some of the changes and stuff. So what Charlie's kind of famous for this idea of education having a multidisciplinary approach or worldly wisdom. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it can be very helpful, especially in the stock picking game.
Mm.
One of the books that I happened to pick up, it's been years now, but it was from Robert Hagstrom. Robert Hagstrom has done several good books outlining Buffett. He did a book called The Warren Buffett Way, and then he did a book called The Warren Buffett Portfolio. One of them he did was called Investing: The Last Liberal Art.
Mm.
And I believe it was inspired from Charlie Munger and this idea of getting this worldly wisdom, and is really this idea that you can learn about investing from psychology. You can learn about investing from biology. There are just these certain parallels that apply to the business world. And it starts to become very fascinating when you start to uncover some of those parallels. And to me, I think one of the biggest benefits of that kind of an approach is it really sets you apart because we all feel the pull of Wall Street. We all feel the pull of Nvidia and wanting to have the hottest AI startup in our back pocket. And oh, by the way, I'm also invested in quantum computing, and I have rockets that are headed to the moon, and so every single trend I'm gonna be on top of, right? So it's very easy to get sucked into that, and it can turn into this tunnel vision, tunnel minded, start to act like the rest of Wall Street, and that can eventually catch up with you. Where if you have a multidisciplinary mindset, I think that helps ground you in, okay, I'm trying to look at this holistically and think bigger picture. I think anything that can help you think bigger picture with investing is beneficial. And
Mhm.
so, one of the things, I mean, sounds kind of obvious and maybe a little oversimplistic, but this idea that trees don't grow to the sky, that's I don't know, what would you call that? Science?
Yeah.
Whatever, science, nature, that's
Yeah.
a science thing, but it's so true in investing too. You see companies and they reach a certain size and then they don't have that same exponential growth.
Mhm.
And technology is the same way, by the way. So all you AI truthers, like, we don't know where the sky is for AI. That's a very simple example, but there are tons of examples just like that where you can apply knowledge from another area, bring it to the world of investing, and it can help you become a better investor. And I'm personally really inspired by that. What about you? Have you found things around worldly wisdom, parallels, or just things that just really stood out from how Charlie Munger decided to look at that whole learning process?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Two areas that kind of stand out. One is not something that I first would have thought of. Our friend Giuliano has really gone down this rabbit hole of trying to embrace this idea of worldly wisdom and trying to pick from, as Charlie would say, the major disciplines. So things like biology, chemistry, physics, psychology, nature, economics, and trying to learn different concepts. And I was talking to Giuliano about this idea of how businesses are set up and the organisms that businesses evolve from is very similar to how our body is, like our biology and how our body is set up. And so nature is connected to business, and you wouldn't normally think of that. And I remember when he was talking to me about this, steam was coming out of my head, because I was like, when I started connecting what he was talking about to Microsoft or Apple, I'm like, wow, okay. So that really started to make sense, and I could understand. I haven't read Darwin, I haven't read some of the things that Giuliano has read, but I'm somewhat educated, and so I had some idea of what he was talking about, but it just blew my mind, and it is something I would like to pursue further at some point in the near future. The other thing that I think really has struck me, and it's not really an area that I would say I'm an expert in by any stretch of the imagination, it would be psychology. And that to me is, there's a lot of behavioral finance people out there now, but I think Charlie, I don't know this for a fact, I'm just putting this label on him myself. I feel like he's like the OG of the whole behavioral finance idea. And that was something he talked a lot about in his speeches. He was the manager for the Daily Journal. He was the chairman of the board for the Daily Journal. And he would give meetings and speeches, and he would pontificate. He gave lots of speeches at commencements and things of that nature. He talked a lot about psychology and how our behavioral biases really dictate how we behave as humans. And yes, there are people that can use that for bad, but the way Charlie was coming at it, and what really attracted me about it, was thinking about how we behave as humans, and then think about the customers or the members or the clients of a business, and how the business is interacting with those people, and what makes the Apple iPhone such a popular device. And it's not just because it's this cool thing, it's because of the buying behavior of humans. And Charlie understood that, Warren understood that. And because of that, that's what allows them to make a great buying decision, like buying Coca-Cola, for example. Ardent Coke Zero user here for many years, and I could speak to the impacts of the psychological bias. If I don't have it, when I go to a restaurant and they offer me Pepsi, I might just choose water. I mean, I'm not that much of a diehard. And so, uh, but all those things, Charlie really was the founder of that. He was talking about these things in the 60s and 70s before it was in vogue to write books about it and have a career as a behavioral finance person. I'm not knocking the people that are doing it. I'm just saying that he was really the person that kind of laid that groundwork. I'm not sure which annual meeting it was, but he talked about this book by Robert Cialdini, Persuasion. and he gave out copies of the book at the meeting. And he believed so highly in the book, and they had Robert come and to the meeting and introduced him at the meeting and everything. I mean, it was a big deal. And that book, huge influence. It talks a lot about the behavior of reciprocity, for example. If somebody gives you something, we automatically feel obligated to do something back for that person. It's just the way our psychology works. So when you go to an airport and somebody walks up to you and gives you a flower, you feel obligated to do something nice for them, and that's stand there and talk to them. And that was an example in the book. So that's kind of where I'm getting it from. Not saying that actually happens to me, but anyway, that it just the whole idea of reciprocity was just kind of blew my mind. And when I read that in the book, it just made a lot of sense. So anyway, long story short, to me, those are two things from his worldly wisdom and his mental models that really have made an impact on me and how I think about my investing, how I work, different things that I try to do in my personal life. And so it's had a huge impact. And that's basically just scratching the surface of two of those models of worldly wisdom. I can't imagine what would happen if I broke the ice and tried to read about physics or something like that. Probably blow my mind. I'd probably just lay in bed twitching, but I still think it would be fascinating to learn about that stuff. And I think it just all helps. It makes you a better human too.
Yeah, it does. One I would like to throw out there, the power of incentives.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I
That's
can't remember his
huge.
exact quote, but tell me where the incentives are.
Or show me the incentive and I'll show you the result, or something along those
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah. And one of the things I really loved about Charlie was he was not afraid to speak his mind,
Oh,
and especially if it rubbed people the wrong way, and especially finance types, and especially, yeah, people like us, right, who
mm-hmm.
decide to stock pick, saying things like stock pickers don't bring any value to society. Like on a net whole, like you guys are all just playing this stupid game, and there's no value to society. You're all just taking
Mm-hmm.
money from each other.
Yep.
But one of the other things he said, which I think as investors and just the finance community in general is something we should think about really deeply, was the 2 and 20 fee structure.
Mm-hmm.
I guess mutual funds are less popular now, but if you're in a hedge fund or something and they have these 2 and 20 fee structures, basically what 2 and 20 means is 2% of a client's assets is the fee that the fund manager gets for managing the money for the client. 20 is the 20% of profits that they also get. And so by having a 2 and 20, you're basically, the fund manager is getting to participate in the upside without having to participate in the downside. Because if in the downside, the fund manager gambles all the client's money away, well, it's okay because he still gets his 2%. It's a 2% every year. But if he gambles all the money away and then ends up finding the next Tesla or Nvidia, he gets 20% of that. So it's a very unfair, incentives not aligned, that is so common now, 2 and 20, that like we don't even bat an eye on it. And he's been talking about it for years, and it still goes on, and it just continues. It's amazing. I love that he called Bitcoin rat poison.
Yeah.
And,
Many
and you
times.
know, and I think he just spoke the truth a lot, and that's something that I really admire about him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's also famous for the EBITDA comment.
Mhm.
You just substitute, when you ever see EBITDA in a report, you just substitute BS earnings.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. He said something a little stronger, but I'm not going to say it on air. But yeah, that was, I think, one of the things that you really admired about him, especially at the annual meetings, because Warren tended to talk more and was more air quote affable. And Charlie always kind of came across as like your grumpy grandfather. And I think Warren even called him the abominable no man. Like whenever Warren would get excited about an idea, he would call Charlie up and Charlie would just say no. And that's what he used him as, the abominable no man. He's probably most famous for his investment in Costco. And I know that's the one that he's talked about the most. There's a kind of a funny story. I'll try to make it brief. During one of the annual meetings, Warren was telling this story about them getting hijacked. And during the hijacking, the hijacker said, "You guys can have one statement before we kill you." And Charlie said, "Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about the benefits of an investment in Costco." And then Warren famously said, "Shoot me first." Um, so he loved to talk about Costco. And I guess, why do you think he liked to talk about Costco so much?
I mean, how could you not love to talk about Costco?
To me, it really sums up everything we talked about before.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, one of the things is to have a company that can compound for you for a very long time. They have to have a avenue for reinvestment.
mhm,
And what's crazy is how long Costco's been around, how wide their scale is. They're still only at like 900 warehouses, something like that. They have not yet even tapped their potential for opening new warehouses, and they're just very slow and methodical. And the things that they've done in the past have been very, very like, forget the rest of you. I'm just going to do my thing.
mhm,
We talk about this ethos that Munger had, where he's just like, I'm just going to speak my mind. Costco looked at Wall Street and was like, "Oh, you don't like the fact that we have low profit margins? Tough. Like, too bad."
right.
You know? And that's just one of those, it's almost like one of their core principles or values is, we're going to prioritize the customer. And so
Mhm,
yes, we will have lower profit margins, but we're creating value for the customer, and to us over the long term it's going to win. So
mhm,
I think some of the things that, out of the many things that you can love about Costco, they have a very long-term mindset. They are sacrificing, you could argue, short-term pain, because they're not jacking up their prices and taking that profit for themselves. And they're doing that to have this long-term compounding. And and they have a lot of the features that Charlie likes to see. To me, that those are some of the really, really powerful things. What about you?
Yeah, I agree 100% with all those things. I think the story of the culture that probably illustrates the culture the best is when the newer CEO took over and he was talking about raising the prices of the $1.50 hot dog and Pepsi. Was that he said to the incoming CEO, if you raise the price, I will kill you. I think that
Yeah.
just kind of sums up, their mentality and what they were really about. And I think that's what Charlie liked about them so much, was that they worried about all the stakeholders as opposed to just the shareholders. And that's probably what he enjoyed, that they were kind of putting their thumb in Wall Street's eye a little bit when they were taking that approach. And I'm sure he kind of liked that. Charlie is famous for a couple of quotes I think we probably should talk a little bit about. The first one is invert, always invert. And I guess, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I don't know which discipline that comes from,
Mhm.
but it's reverse engineering, right? Rather than try to tackle a problem in the same way that everybody else is doing it, take a opposite approach and either figure out all the ways that something can go wrong. I try to do that a lot, and we've talked about that. Like, when I am very excited about something, what are the actual risks? Let's focus on the risks. Or if I'm not too jazzed about an idea, okay, what are all the things that could go right? And just having that balancing of your emotions, balancing of the way you analyze stocks, how you research. I think it's easier to get to the big picture answer when you are trying to invert things. And I'm far from an expert in doing that, and I haven't like methodically tried to invert more, but at times when that can pop in my mind and be like, "Hey, you're stuck on this. Why don't you try to invert?" That can be a very, very helpful way to getting to the answer. Because if you're going to try to be different with your investing, and you're going to try to do things that people aren't doing, it's going to take some mental effort.
Mhm.
And if it's an easy problem to solve, everybody's already solved it. If it's a problem that's a little bit harder and maybe it makes your head hurt, or you have to like push through it, and then you can invert and then find the solution, then that can be where profits are, because people aren't taking that path because they're not thinking to invert, or they're not taking the time to invert. So I think it can be very powerful from a lot of different ways. And so that's one way I think you can apply that.
Mhm. Yeah, I 100% agree. And in the corporate world, it's popular to do like an analysis of what could go wrong when you roll out a product or a different project that they're working on, to like anticipate all the things that go wrong. And really what they're doing is they're just applying this principle of trying to invert what they're creating. I think it was Steve Jobs who talked about, when he was designing the first iPod or the iPhone, was trying to figure out what were other people doing and try to do the opposite of that to try to make them work, because the ones that they were competing against were obviously doing things, but he felt like there was a better way to do it. And so he was looking at the problem instead of like, how can we just build it? How can we just invert what they're doing and try to make it better? And so I think that that kind of thing is a brilliant idea.
That it's such a good example,
Mhm.
because all of the competitors were all looking at these devices like these are electronics.
Mhm.
And Steve Jobs flipped it on its head and he said, no, this is a consumer interface. So rather than try to make the electronics fit to consumers,
Mhm.
no, consumers are going to tell us what they want, and then we're going to fit the electronics
Mhm.
to them. And that's where the iPhones come from. And
Mhm.
that's something that, I mean, I'm a left brainer too. So hey, I would have made the same mistake. Like the tech guys are just not thinking that way. We're just thinking, okay, here's the technology, and we're going to dictate to the consumer what they can do.
Right.
Steve Jobs is like, no, we're going to invert that,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think the track record speaks for itself on that one.
Yeah, I think that's done okay. I think that's done okay.
I work really hard to find the best insights I can every single month at Value Spotlight. To see a sample of my previous work, go to stockwriteup.com.
The other thing that Charlie's famous for is talking a lot about avoiding stupidity
Mm,
and trying to stay within your circle, avoiding stupidity and not trying to be, the next Einstein. And I think there's a lot of logic and a lot of wisdom in that. And I've said this before, it's just, I'm sure it's just a take on me trying to internalize this from Charlie, is we don't get style points at the end for complexity or brilliance. And I think that's what Charlie was trying to say when he would say it in his blunt style. We just try to avoid making stupid mistakes, and that makes us better than a lot of other investors.
yeah, that's a hard one, but yeah, I'm glad that you constantly remind me of that, because it's so true.
it's it's really hard, and we all want to buy the shiny thing. We all want to, I'm not saying that Nvidia is a bad investment, but we all want to buy the hot sexy thing, Nvidia or a Palantir or whatever. And a lot of times the greatest investments can be a Coca-Cola that you buy in 1988 and hold until 2025. I don't remember the exact numbers, but he's making substantially more in dividends now annually than he is from the cost basis of when he first bought Coca-Cola all those years ago. So, those kinds of things are, that to me is avoiding stupidity and just buying what buying something good. He's famous for that. That's, I think, why a lot of tech investors don't like him much, is because he's not going after the new shiny object, whatever that is. He's just staying within his circle and trying to avoid stupidity.
Yeah, I think the irony of, and obviously I'm pretty heavy in different tech stocks, so
Me too.
obviously, I'm not trying to like throw shade at all of it. There
No.
are a lot of great businesses, but if a tech stock was able to, let's say, 10x in 2 years or something, if you invert if you invert that, well, if they were able to do it in 2 years, why wouldn't somebody else be able to do the same thing and take them out in 2 years?
Yep.
So that if you invert like what caused a business's success, you get to, oh, okay, well, maybe that's why Munger stays away from that, because that high growth is a double-edged sword. It can be the
Mhm.
same thing that takes you out later.
Yep. Yep. Totally. Totally. So I guess, what do you feel like now that Charlie is gone, what do you think his legacy and influence on investors will be? If you had to narrow it down to maybe a couple things.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say what it was for me personally. There was a lot, so I hate to boil it down to one thing, but something that popped up. I was looking at some of our old blog posts, and hey, we've done a couple good ones. All right,
All
like
right.
we've written some good posts about Charlie Munger. Um, this is the one that really stood out to me. And I remember reading this and I started to internalize it even when I was still an engineer. And I think it was a big part of my success today. So I will share it. There's a quote. Okay. This is what Warren Buffett said about Charlie Munger in an interview. Charlie, as a very young lawyer, was probably getting $20 an hour. He thought to himself, who's my most valuable client? He decided it was himself. So he decided to sell himself an hour each day. He did it early in the morning, working on these construction projects and real estate deals. Everybody should do this. Be the client and then work for other people too, and sell yourself an hour a day. And so the way I applied that in my personal life was even though I was doing my thing in my 9 to 5, the first hour of every morning, which is when I'm most productive personally, that first hour is my hour. That's where I focus on myself and projects that are gonna grow myself over the long term. And I've read a lot of annual reports in those first hours of days. And it's something that I still try to do today as close as I can with scheduling and everything. So this idea that you are valuable, your time is valuable, and you need to invest in yourself. I think that not only applies to investors, but I think that can apply to everybody. And I
Mhm.
think it's a very valuable thing that I don't even know if he realized he taught people.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a fantastic one. Yeah, fantastic one. I really like that. And I adopted that similarly. And to me, I think the thing I take away from him is the idea that you can learn so much by just putting in the time to read.
Mhm.
And whether it's books, whether it's annual reports, whether it's blog posts, doesn't matter. His kids, he always joked that his kids thought he was a walking book because he spent so much time reading. And I think that is really the path to getting better at anything is by just trying to educate yourself and trying to learn something new every day. He always liked to say that he wanted to go to bed smarter than he woke up every day. And I think if you can kind of approach life like that, I think you're going to improve not only in your investing, but just everything about your life. You'll be more interesting and you'll have better friendships, better relationships, and all those things will improve if you try to just get a little bit smarter every day. It doesn't take 18 hours a day to do that. So I think, you and I are probably a testament to that just by continually grinding away over the years. We've gotten hopefully, a little bit smarter than we were when we started.
Yeah, I like to think so.
Yeah, I like to think so too, but time will tell. Anything else you'd like to add about Sir Charlie before we sign off?
I don't think so. How about yourself?
No, I think we covered his life fairly well. As Andrew said, if you really want to know more about Charlie, go to the source first. Listen to his speeches. There's tons of them on YouTube or on Spotify. You can find lots of his work online, or you can check out our blogs at einvestingforbeginners.com. As Andrew said, we've written about him a fair amount too. So there's lots of great stuff to learn about Charlie and all his great teachings.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that is going to wrap us up for today. We hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach out to us anytime, newsletter at einvestingforbeginners.com. That is the place to email us. Connect, learn, and grow with Value Spotlight. Peace.